Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service. Today I want to present Dignities and their fall. Okay, so we're going to look at the planets, the signs, and the planets. We're going to look at things like rulerships. We're going to look at detriments, and we're going to look at dignities and exaltations and all of those things that help us determine how to read a chart. So this is, again, based in the Hellenistic astrology. Actually, it's a Mesopotamia. They believe something that came out of Mesopotamia. And so this little video will just be some real basic astrology for anyone who's really interested in going a little deeper into chart reading. So before I begin, as always, I want to say thank you to all of the people who subscribe to this channel. We're a small educational channel, so every little bit helps. All the likes, the comments. I really want to thank you all so much. If you're not a subscriber, I hope you'll consider becoming one. We are an educational channel. I am focusing on educational concepts. So today's video, as I said, will be the dignities. The second video this week, we'll go back and we'll do some medical astrology for diabetes. But I want to go back to my basics for today. And what we're going to look at, and we're going to be looking at how the original astrologers, the people who came up with this technique, what was their motivation? What were they thinking about? How did this work? You know, we kind of look on our dignities now in modern astrology, and we kind of take a lot for granted. And we don't use them maybe as much as we used to. Although I think it would depend on what kind of astrologer you were. Because I do think there are still a lot of astrologers that are really, really good at what I call scoring or weighing a chart, which is basically what we're doing when we're looking at things like dignities, exaltation, depressions, and detriments. So these are areas by which they score the signs and the planets. Now, how they do that, and I'll get to some papers, notes in a minute to show you, but how they did it was they wanted to basically they cited examples. Okay, so let me give you an example of why they did what they did or how they looked at it. Okay, and again, this is really from the Mesopotamian tradition. It says that planets in strong dignity are like people born into wealth or elevated social classes. It's easier for them to be successful, to navigate a situation. It's like they can ask about something and get what they want. That's what it means if a planet falls in its place of dignity. And what a dignity is the difference between exaltations and depressions. Now, what is the difference? Well, exaltations are where the planet is exalted, where it does the best, where it's very, very strong. And I'm not talking rulerships. We're going to get to that in a minute. These are the placements where everything is supposed to do the best and be the strongest. In order to determine the depression, which would be where it would be weaker, is to take the opposite side. Okay. Now, on my list, I have them totally separate, but I wanted to explain for the video how they came by the information. For example, the sun is exalted in Aries. I am, first house, I am. Obviously, its depression would then be Libra, because in Libra, it's we are. It's about partnerships. So it's not so much about the sun. So you can see that depression, obviously. Okay, so here's another one. The moon in Taurus and you can see how this is going a little bit, is where it's exalted. Okay, so the moon is exalted in Taurus, where there's a concern or a building up of security. Therefore, it would be in its depression in Scorpio. So think about the differences of the two energies and how they oppose. So you can kind of see it. Saturn is exalted in Libra. Therefore, its depression would be Aries. And once again, you can kind of see this. Libra, more laid back, looks at both sides, wants to be fair. Aries, I am. So some of this stuff is rather obvious. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, and therefore it is depressed in Capricorn. Well, Capricorn is about, think of it like the government or the big business or and Jupiter is more of a personal planet. It's actually still considered a personal planet of expansion, and the place to be in that is usually in the home. So that made sense to me too. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. It's a great use of the Capricorn energy. It's the great use of Mars because it actually gives Mars some direction, some discipline. Obviously, it would be depressed in Cancer, where it wouldn't have as much of an outlet. Then we come to Venus, which is exalted in Pisces. Compassion, absolute love. Sorry about that. I had to go out for a minute, but I had a noise issue. We took care of it. So the opposite of Venus, which would be Pisces, that compassion, that love, that, I mean, when you think of Pisces, you think of universal love, right? Well, its depression is, of course, Virgo, because Virgo is a more critical type of energy. Mercury is exalted in Virgo. Here we go. That detail, that sense of necessary to perfection. Obviously, it is depressed when it is in the sign of Pisces. So you can see how they work, okay? So obviously, it means that anybody who's born with a sun in Libra, and that's millions and millions of people, their sun doesn't work as well as, say, a sun in Aries, because a sun in Aries is much more aggressive, much more assertive. Libra, not so much, because it's more concerned about the other person. So every single one of these makes sense. I mean, Taurus is about security. So is the moon. But Scorpio can be about other things, namely things like revenge or, I mean, I don't want to say that because there's one of the things I did as an astrologer, and this is a really good place to put this. I've been an astrologer for many, many, many years. Well, let's just go with this. Many decades. And in that process, I have really noticed, I buy a lot of books, and I know that you can see, well, actually you can't see here, but when I'm on the other camera, you can see all of the books around me, which, by the way, I've really pared down to just my resource books because I recently had to change my rooms and I had to get rid of 18 boxes of books. But in that process of all these resource books, I have a very strong value system to determine how I am going to purchase the book. And one of the first things that I do, especially in the early years, the first 10 to 20 years that I was working, I would read Scorpio. Yes, I did. I went right to it. Because if it was really hateful and it was really vengeful, I would not buy the book. Because they didn't understand the energy of Scorpio. And if I'm going to buy their book, it means I respect their knowledge. And if they're too hard on the sign of Scorpio, then they're missing something. And I do want to say that here, that Scorpio is probably one of the most misunderstood signs that we have. And with that said, as its modern day ruler, Pluto often gets the short end of the stick as well. And it's not because these things are evil on any level. It's because it takes a greater depth to be able to understand how a scorpion functions, or how that planet Pluto operates. There's a real science to that stuff, and science is not prejudiced. And if I read prejudicial material, it was a real red flag. So please make note of that. Any of you out there who practice astrology, I think you all know what I'm talking about. Most particularly if you are a Scorpio. And let me just say this. If you are a Scorpio, there's no one more loyal. There's no one more determined. So if you've got a Scorpio friend, that friend is going to be there for you no matter what. Just don't cross them. And how hard is that if they're really your friend? You're not going to cross them. I hope. Anyway, so I had to point that out. That's actually something I've wanted to say for decades, but I'm glad I got to say it. Okay, so the next area I want to talk about is, rulerships. And I love the way they put this. Now, remember that the exaltations and the depressions are dignities, and they show, as I said earlier, like somebody born into wealth or privilege. Those are the signs that are entitled. Life is easy for them, a little bit easier for them. Now, we all have a combination of these things in our charts, and that's how they get weighed. Okay? Now, rulerships are called, in old astrology, they called the house dwellings. Okay? And the house, the dwelling, has visitors. And those visitors are planets. Okay? I love the way they did this because I think it does make it simpler for those of us who practice astrology. And actually, I do look at weighing systems. So I have for decades. But when I was first studying astrology back in the very early days, before I was really involved with trans-Neptunians and asteroids, which really absorbed me since the early to mid 90s. But prior to that, so going back to the 70s, I really did play a lot with the dignities, the rulerships, the exaltations, and the depressions. So the rulerships, which is our next area, is something that, as I said, it's a visitor in a house. Okay? And it's about the relationship between the house, the host, and the planet. And it's really important. And you say to me, how would you know, unless it's right on that cusp, where is the aspect? And I would say, good question, but I have the answer. And it goes back to the way I like to work with horary, which I do want to get back to at some point, or the way I work with diurnals, which I'd like to get back to at some point, because those are really things that I do. And when I don't do horary as much, as I'm more of an academic when it comes to horary, but I really do diurnals for real. I mean, that's actually a product in my shop. And the product is actually called Daily Angles, but what it is diurnals. And what was explained in this book was that whatever planet rules the house, okay? So remember that we have a rulership, okay? And the rulership is what ideally should rule the house. Now, we don't all have Aries risings. And those of us who might have Aries rising don't necessarily have a complete house system of Aries, because maybe houses got intercepted. In other words, one sign does not have a cusp. Maybe that Aries was very late in the degrees of Aries, and as a result, the native could be missing houses. Maybe they're missing Pisces. Maybe they're missing Taurus. But you see what I mean? Like and then if you're missing one, you're going to miss the opposite as well. Okay, so that you're always going to be, if you've got a house interception, it's going to occur twice. It's always going to be in even numbers. Okay, but I want to talk about other ways that you would look at that. Okay, that we could look at that. And one way which we would do that is you would go into an astrology program, and we could even do it with today's chart. We could just do a chart at the instant, and I could show you several reports. Of course, I'd be using Solar Fire, but you could do this on Janus as well. And you could see from the reports, for example, what the interaction is between the two planets. And I just for the sake of this, say that somebody has Sun in Aries, which is an exaltation. Okay. Now let's go with the rulers. Let's go with Sun in Leo. That's a ruler. Okay. And so they have Sun in Leo, but it falls in the 11th house, which is the Aquarius house, or the house of Uranus. It's not going to be as strong there. But what you'd really want to look at is what rules that house, okay? Now, if the sun is in Aries, okay, and then means it's an Aries, or at least it's around the Aries house. But let's say that cusp house was really actually Pisces, and that it showed up later in the house of Aries. And so what you'd have to look at is then what rules Pisces, which in this case would be Jupiter. All right. And you'd say to yourself, okay, we already know it's the 11th house, not the best place because it's the opposing house. But then what you would do is you would look at the aspects between Jupiter and the sun and see if there are any. And it would depend where Jupiter is in the chart. So I hope that made some sense. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, so Mars is ruled by Aries. And or Scorpio in the old system. And it depends on, in horary, they still go by that, which is one of the holdups that I've really had with really delving into it, because I tend to know the modern ruler so well. But let's go with an older ruler. So Mars is in Aries, and it falls in the 4th house, and which is the house of Cancer, and it is in and it actually is okay, let's do this. Mars is in Cancer, and it falls in the 4th house, which isn't very bad, by the way, but it is really, because say that the Mars, which fell in that Cancer house, which is then ruled by Mars, but I'm sorry, by Moon. Okay, and the Moon is squaring Mars. Let's say the Moon was really in Aries. That's actually a mutual reception, isn't it? So you're really looking at the house cusp, what rules that house cusp, and then what are the dynamics between the planet that fell in that house cusp? Because remember, it's a host, it's a visitor. Does a visitor feel welcome? Or does a visitor feel uncomfortable? It's a total way to read astrology. And we all have these different weighings in our chart. Okay. So I'm going to, since we really do know the rulerships, and then the opposite of the rulership is the fall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my paper and we're going to go through all of it. Okay. And if you, that way, if you want to do screenshots or if you want to make notes, I'm going to just put up only a paper that is going to explain these. Like, for example, the detriment would be the opposite of the domicile. Okay. So that the house or sign or the rulers, and it's considered exile. I know that sounds really funny, but it's also called the fall. Okay. So in modern day, we call it the fall. So let's check it out. So I'm back and I'm just kind of going to show you what I have here. All right. So what I did was I listed everything. And so that you can see the exaltation, they do make sense, but it's really worth it to kind of review them, put them in your head, get to know them. And then the opposite sign would be the depression, okay, which is Moon and Scorpio. Some people call the depressions the fall. So, and then detriment for the rulerships and detriment. So, I just realized that when I saw Moon and Scorpio as a detriment, I always considered Moon and Scorpio as a fall. So I think I've got it a little bit backwards. And I think the depressions are what is really referred to as the fall. Okay. When I say the fall, it means that the energy is weakened in these signs. Okay. Like Mars is weakened in Cancer. Moon is weakened in Scorpio. And it makes sense when you look at it and you can put it all together. So then where we left off was the rulerships. I went by the old rulerships because I was taking this from the Hellenistic book, but I do want to review this for a moment. Okay, so Sun in Leo, Moon in Cancer. I don't think anybody could argue that they actually work. Okay, they are the rulers. But here we get into Mercury in Gemini and Virgo. Okay, so I'm going to buy that. I'm going to say, yeah, Mercury does really fit both. It's a gathering of information and it's the perfecting of detail. Sounds very mercurial to me. Venus and Taurus and Libra both work too. So you do still have Venus is about security and the building up of security, which we already spoke about when we talked about the exaltation of the moon. But Taurus is also about the accumulation of finance because of security. Libra is about the accumulation of beauty or the acknowledgement of beauty. Okay? I can buy all those. This is where I start having a problem. And I know it's because I look at all of the planets, trans-Neptunians, okay? Like, I'm going to go you one better. There are astrologers back in the 70s and 80s after Chiron was discovered, okay? I think it was like 77 or something like that. Yes, I was already doing astrology. I know it's been a very long time. But in any event, Virgo was going to be associated with the Chiron. So it might have changed rulerships at that time. It never really went anywhere. I just thought it was a piece of information that would be really interesting to share. Okay. So, and I could see Chiron and Virgo a little bit, but I do have to say that Virgo's attention to detail and Chiron's ability to be alternative, that doesn't work. But that was really interesting. Okay, so we made all the way down to Mars. I can accept Mars and Aries because of that aggression. Also, Mars is action without a brain. And sometimes I've been known to accuse my Aries friends of taking action without a brain. Some of you who know me might know that's true. Um, and I say that with just, the most pleasant expression. But anyway, Scorpio is also associated with Mars. And if you think of Scorpio and vengeance, um, the Mars sort of applies. But if you think of Mars as not really having a brain, what's vengeance? I mean, Mars is a warrior. I don't think warriors, I think that, when you think of a soldier, they do what they're told. I think that's the basis of their training. I just don't see that with Scorpio as much. So Scorpio in the modern is then applicable to the sign of Pluto, both being extremely transformational energies. Jupiter in Sagittarius and Pisces. Yes, I can sort of buy this because Pisces and Sagittarius, well, Sagittarius is the philosopher, and you only expand through knowledge. I mean, I believe that one of the biggest ways to expand anything in our life is through knowledge. So Sagittarian, higher education, even the law, all of that, Jupiter. Pisces, because there's a little bit of spirituality attached to Jupiter, and there you would find that spirituality in Pisces. However, once again, I'm going with the modern ruler. Pisces really works with Neptune. They are synonymous in their energies, in their compassion, in their lack of clarity, in their self-deceptions. Okay, so there's a connection there that just can't be denied. Saturn, okay, Aquarius and Capricorn. Well, it's really interesting because Saturn and Capricorn really works because of the structure concept. And, Capricorn represents structure, no matter how you shake it. Even people who have strong Capricorn in their charts. I always joke about cogs. Cogs are those people that work in the business. Okay, they are the business cogs. They work in offices and they are a machine in and of their own right. But they represent cogs in a machine. They are part of a larger structure. Often have extremely strong Capricorn energies in the chart. Aquarius are rebellious. I can't see it as structure. They tear down structure if they could. I don't see it. They're just too rebellious. It takes discipline sometimes to be rebellious, but not really. I think rebellion is just having another idea. Uranus, freedom, shining new concepts on things. Very Prometheus, another term for Uranus. That's Aquarius. I don't see as anything else. Aquarius is about the future. If Saturn is about the cog, the structure, Aquarius is about the future. It's also a very humanitarian energy. And I don't think of that as Capricorn. Capricorn is more about the money. All about the money. Okay? Or the structure. You see what I'm saying? It's about the building up of the structure. Aquarius, no. No, they're for the people. So this is where I personally have issues. And I would imagine that, I know, I don't have to imagine that there are a lot of other astrologers that feel the same way I do. And I think it just depends on what area of astrology you're coming from. And I'm not saying that people that go by the old ruler sister are wrong. I don't. I read an astrology column on Horary every time I get it, which I think is every 3 months now. She's fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. But she's going by the old ruler system. So again, I'm not going to put it down. I do know that it keeps me from stepping further into horary. But I think that, again, I come from a strong bias. I've been an asteroid astrologer now for literally decades. And I don't really feel that that works for me. But I'm looking at details under a different magnifying lens. So I do want to say that. Okay. Last but not least, I put this as detriment or fall. Okay. But I also want to do this. I am actually going to change this, okay, to exile. Okay. Because that's really more appropriate. And if you think about this, look, Sun in Aquarius. All right, let me explain this one to you because this is easy for me. Leos like to lead. Leos are proud. Leos want to stand out in a crowd. They like entertaining other people. Aquarians don't. None of the above. They don't need to be leaders. They don't want to be leaders. And most often when they are, they're reluctant leaders. They don't need to be center of attention. They generally prefer to be in the background or with their group of friends. In other words, they'd rather be absorbed into the posse than be the leader. Okay, I'm going to use that word posse because it's something that I think younger people can relate to. So your leader, the head, the person who's out in front, that would have more of a Leo concept. But the people that stand behind them would be an Aquarian concept. Now, that means that the sun is definitely not comfortable in the role of the leader. They're not. There's a joke about Aquarius. I know I've said this before. They're humanitarians. They love mankind. They just hate people. I think it's because they don't have patience for people. So because oftentimes they're ahead of the game. They live 50 years ahead of themselves, I read once. And so it takes 50 years for people to catch up to them. I can tell you as an Aquarius that I have lived my life from day one in a manner that was quite unusual to all of those around me. But today, I can tell you that the way I live is becoming more commonplace, or the way I work and live. So I just, I've been thinking that people should work at home for a long time. So I am ahead of my time, but I am a reluctant leader. So I can speak for Sun in Aquarius quite well. The other one is Moon in Capricorn. And let me explain a little bit about Moon in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn, even as babies, there could be some kind of disconnect with a parent, one of the parents, maybe the mom. And so there's a distance in the emotions, or the way they need to be emotionally secure is going to be more related to structure and finance, I guess, because, well, I think of Capricorn as finance, but it's more like a cog. So here we go again with that security as being in the slot you belong in. Mercury in Sagittarius and Pisces is, I do want to point this out. Look at this, Mercury in Sagittarius and Pisces, and then look at Jupiter in Gemini and Virgo. Okay, so Jupiter normally does really well with Sagittarius and Pisces, but think about what Jupiter is. Jupiter is expansive. They're not worried about details. Jupiter is just about being optimistic and maybe just kind of, I want to say plowing ahead, but that's more of a Mars concept. I'm thinking more like they're so optimistic that that's why good luck comes to them. Okay. When you're talking about Mercury in Sagittarius, now you're talking about missing a lot of details or being too maybe emotional or too concerned to get all the details. Sagittarius is the big picture. Mercury is not big picture. And also, Sagittarius tends to be very singularly minded when they are on a track. For example, Sagittarians tend to be very judgmental. Once they're involved, say like you have like they're the religious zealots, okay? Well, that's not a really great place for Mercury because there's no objectivity, you see. But then there's no objectivity with Pisces either. So you understand why Mercury doesn't work there. the same thing with Jupiter. I'm just kind of jumping over this one, but same thing with Jupiter in Gemini and Virgo. Now, if I were going by the old system, and I would, like to do that, I would still say that that since, we have two detail-oriented signs, in terms of how would this work with, and Saturn and Leo and Cancer, which would be worse? Well, I'm going to be honest with you. Okay, so we start, Saturn and Leo is, again, you got to be really disciplined with Saturn, and it's about structure. But if Leo is about I am, and Cancer is just so emotional, I tend to think that Saturn is worse in Cancer, whereas Leo might be weakened in Uranus. And the reason being, because Leo is such a personal I am, and Uranus is this universal freedom, love, and all of that. I would think in Leo it would be difficult to get out of your own way. There's a whole generation of us out there. So it's, something to think about. If I were to do Jupiter, I would probably take out the Virgo. I'm thinking that's what it is. Yeah, because I would stay. See, Pisces is ruled by Neptune in my mind. And what I would do is I would say that in Virgo, where you're looking at details rather than just being compassionate about a whole situation, would be more of a detriment. Whereas Gemini is the gathering of information, but not necessarily having it affect your opinion one way or the other, would be difficult, because Jupiter does, as I said before, get very pinned to that one idea. Since Mars is an Aries energy, okay, I am going to say that with regards to Mars, I would put Libra as its real exile, and Taurus would be Pluto's. And the reason why I say that is because here we go with that transformational quality. Well, Taurus is much more about security, not transformation, and beauty, not transformation. There's a lot of ugliness in transformation, okay? And it's necessary. Whereas Mars in Libra makes sense, because if you're always trying to look at both sides of an issue, it makes it very difficult to pound ahead on one. Okay? Venus in Aries or Scorpio. Okay, now that's interesting. That's interesting. Because, as I said, because it always goes by the opposite, okay? And I'm going to let stand, because I don't really feel that Taurus or Libra have to be ruled by anything else, okay? So I would have to then go with, okay, Venus and Scorpio and Venus Aries. So let's talk about why these would work. All right. Venus in Aries is obvious, because Venus is about the other person, and Aries is about I am. So that's obvious. Scorpio is different. And let me just tell you this. In the sign of Scorpio, it's tough, because they love so intently that they truly believe in the perfect union. And when it doesn't work, it's bad. So there is there's no Libra about it. Okay, it's all or nothing. And that kind of weakens that Libra or even Taurus concepts. So let me come back. So I'm back. I hope that was helpful. I hope it was educational. Once again, if you have any questions, please contact me through the website, divinationcounselingservice.com. I'd be happy to answer them. Also, if you are interested in any private work, I don't say that enough. I do hear that from people. I do private work. Actually, that's how I make a living. Obviously not from the YouTube channel, which is very small. But with that said, I appreciate you much more so because we are a small channel. And I really do hope that you will share, like, comment, especially comment, because I love hearing from you. And if you're not a subscriber, I hope you'll become one. And with all that said, until we meet again, I wish you all only happy readings.